Start, bench, cut these 3 Penn State running backs in college. Can you tell me who Penn State football is playing this weekend?
Sorry, what?
Welcome back into the Penn State Pulse. I'm your host, Dylan Dawson. The Nittany Lions have a huge matchup that awaits them across the country this Saturday as they travel to take on USC in a 3:30 matchup on CBS, which of course will be 12:30 local time out there in SoCal. The betting line on this thing currently sits at Penn State -4. I've seen it as low as 2.5 and as high as 5.5 or 6 a day or two ago. This feels very much like a game that will sort of determine if Penn State is a legitimate championship contender this season. USC dropped their recent game to Minnesota, so they fell out of the rankings completely, but they are a few plays away from being a top 10 team. They were 11 last week. This is a very good team that PSU has to play on the road across multiple time zones. This stat has been floating around quite a bit. I'm sure some of you have seen it. I figured that I'd share that Big Ten teams are 1-8 this season when traveling across multiple time zones to play a road conference game, which is, of course, what PSU is doing this week. That stat is a bit overblown because when you look into it, most of those losses were expected or they were favored to lose anyways, regardless of the time zones. So it's not like those were all upsets, but the stat is noteworthy regardless. So let's get this thing started by highlighting some USC players to keep an eye on this Saturday. Miller Moss is, of course, their guy at QB, who is one of the top in the conference at his position. Moss has thrown for about 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns through 5 games. He's not really a dual threat guy, but he can take off and burn you with his legs on occasion. So that's something Penn State and Tom Allen will have to account for. He has been very accurate for the majority of the season. He's sitting at about 65% completion percentage right now, but he has been making some mistakes, especially under pressure. The USC offensive line is probably the weakest link on this team, and they haven't been able to give Miller Moss a clean pocket very often. Moss has 4 picks this season, and I believe a few fumbles as well. So he can make the big play, but also the big mistake. Speaking of mistakes, USC has made a lot of them against the higher-end competition they faced this season. They have committed 2 turnovers against Michigan, 3 against Wisconsin, and then 3 last weekend against Minnesota. USC has a handful of weapons, but their top pass catchers both reside in that receiver room, and that would be Zachariah Branch and Jacoby Lane. Branch is quite possibly the most explosive player in college football. He is only a true sophomore, but he is good. He's fast, he's explosive. He also has return duties for the Trojans, so he returns kicks and punts, I believe. He's on pace to crush his catch numbers from last year. He had 31, I believe, all of last year. He's already up to 21 through 5 games, but he has been somewhat suppressed on the season on that explosivity level. I think that could be due more to the weapons emerging in the USC offense, which allows them, of course, to spread the ball around more. Branch actually doesn't have a touchdown yet on the season, so he is absolutely due for one. But 21 catches for 227 yards are the numbers so far for Zachariah Branch. The Trojans' top wide receiver as far as statistics go would be Jacoby Lane. He is more of a possession guy at about 6'4", 195, but he can make the big play as well. He also has 21 catches on the year for 234 yards and 4 touchdowns. Running back Woody Marks, he is a playmaker. He'll definitely need to be accounted for this weekend. Despite running behind a struggling offensive line, Marks is averaging nearly 6 yards per carry so far. He's put up 468 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground, and he is very involved in the pass game as well. He's actually caught 19 balls on the year, which is 3rd on the team behind the aforementioned duo of Branch and Lane. Moving on to the defense, I apologize if I pronounced this name wrong, but at linebacker, Easton Mascarenas-Arnold is the leading tackler on that Trojan defense. He has collected 36 so far on the year, along with an interception. He was a very effective playmaker last year as well, as an Oregon State Beaver, putting up 106 tackles on the year as well as 2 sacks and 2 picks. This is his first season with USC after spending his first 2 out there in Corvallis with Oregon State. Safety, Kamari Ramsey is one of their better DBs. He has 20 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, a sack, and a pass defensed on the year. All right, let's now make the transition into some predictions. A lot of you guys know the drill at this point. I will give 3 predictions as well as my pick for the final score. So first up, this game will be a huge test for the Penn State secondary. USC is very deep, very talented at wide receiver. Probably the second best wide receiver room that Penn State will face all year, behind just Ohio State, of course. And they're going to air it out. Miller Moss has been throwing like 40 passes per game. So this prediction is basically to say that the PSU secondary will have a solid night, but will also take their lumps along the way. Give me 250 plus pass yards for USC quarterback Miller Moss, but 2 interceptions for the Nittany Lions. Next, as I briefly mentioned early on in the pod, the Trojans' offensive line has become the far and away number 1 concern for that team. It hasn't necessarily shown up too much on the stat sheet, but that's because the poor O-line play has basically shifted USC's entire offensive approach. They have Moss getting that ball out very quickly before the pass rush can get home, so that kind of hinders their strength as an offense, which is the passing game. They don't have the time to let those talented receivers get deep downfield and allow the routes to develop. So I think USC will have to at least try some of that deeper stuff this Saturday, which provides PSU edge rushers with some opportunities to make some splash plays. So give me 4 plus sacks, with at least one of those being a strip sack for the Nittany Lions. Finally, this game appears to be a great opportunity for the Penn State run game. USC has been giving up quite a bit on the ground, especially through the big play. Shout out to Landon Tengwall for pulling this stat. The Trojans have given up runs this season of 63, 47, 41, 40, and 39 yards. Not sure about you guys, but Nick Singleton absolutely comes to mind for me in that scenario. So with that being said, give me 200 plus yards on the ground for PSU and a carry of 50 plus yards for Mr. Singleton. Finally, for the score prediction, I am going with Penn State 27, USC 17. I think PSU tries to establish the run and slow this game down. The Nittany Lions absolutely have the advantage in the trenches in this matchup, so they'll try to keep the key matchups in that area. Less drives and less snaps for USC's offense means less opportunity for their playmakers to make plays. Because of their loss to Minnesota last weekend, the Trojans are now 3-2, and I'm not going to lie, that scares the hell out of me. One more loss pretty much officially kills USC's playoff chances, so they are backed into a corner now. Penn State is going to get USC's best swing this Saturday, so they'll need to be prepared and ready to go from the jump. If Penn State shows up and plays C+ or B- football, they will walk out of the Coliseum with a 5-1 record. So they need to show up. They need to show up early and be ready to go. So that is going to do it for today's episode of the Penn State Pulse. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the game, and I will be back in front of the camera shortly after to recap what went down.